Good morning, everybody. My name is Stephen Glicher, and welcome to this webinar. And just a quick disclaimer before we start that the following presentation is produced for general guidance only, and professional advice should always be sought before any transaction is undertaken. Your individual circumstances can vary, and therefore no responsibility can be accepted by Harts Limited or Emma Fay from the HR Department Limited or any of their affiliates for any action taken or any decision made to refrain from action by attendees of this presentation. Okay, that's our offices there, and the contents today. What we want to cover today is a general update on government support. I'm going to hand you over then to a presentation by Emma Fay on getting back to work and what you need to do, and I'm glad Emma's joining us again for this presentation. She's been with us throughout this process, and we can only say thank you for her for that. And then hopefully at the end we'll have some opportunities for questions and answers. A few admin things first of all, and what I'm going to do is I want to mute everybody to start with on the basis that that cuts out all the background noise. But then at the end, if you want to unmute yourself to answer questions, you can do. You'll also see there is a chat box available to you. So if you want to use the speech bubble in the top right hand corner of your screen, you can then type in any question that you want, and we'll try and answer that towards the end of the session. The webinar is being recorded, and so if you want to go back and go over some of the points which you may have missed during today, then this will be available on our YouTube channel later today, along with all the previous webinars which we've done over the last 6 to 8 weeks or so. That's all the admin stuff done first of all. So what I'd like to do just to start off with is have a look at the general update. What we have as from today is the claims for statutory sick pay opens today. So this can be claimed back if you've have to pay statutory sick pay to employees due to the coronavirus. So who can use the scheme? If you're an employer and you've been claiming for an employee who's eligible for sick pay due to coronavirus, or you've had a pay-as-you-earn payroll scheme that was created before 28th of February 20, and you've had fewer than 250 employees at February 20, which will cover most of our clients, you can claim back from both the coronavirus job retention scheme and the statutory sick pay rebate scheme for the same employee, but not at the same time. Employees do not have to give you a doctor's fit note, but you can ask them to give you either an isolation note from the NHS, or which basically says they are self-isolating and cannot work, or a letter from the GP telling them that they have to stay at home for 12 weeks because they're at high risk of severe illness. It covers all types of employment contracts, including full-time employees, part-time employees on agency contracts, 0-hours contracts, and fixed-term contracts. You can use an agent to do this online, so we're happy to do that claim. And basically what you can claim is up to 2 weeks of statutory sick pay, starting from the first day of sickness, if an employee is unable to work because they have coronavirus symptoms, or they cannot work because they're self-isolating because someone they live with has symptoms, or they are shielding and have a letter from the NHS or GP telling them to stay at home for at least 12 weeks. Previously, as you probably realise, you can't claim back statutory sick pay, but now you can from day one, and it's for a 2-week period. The weekly rate was £94.25 before the 6th of April 20 and £95.85 post the 6th of April 20. You've got to keep some records, and you've got to keep the records for 3 years. But basically, it's an online claim. If we're doing your payroll, we can do that claim for you, and that is actually open as from today. That's what's in relation to the statutory sick pay. In relation to the job retention scheme, you've seen no doubt in the press that this has been extended till the end of October. However, there are some significant changes to it. We haven't got the full guidance as yet. It's not been issued, and they said it will be issued by the end of the month, which is basically this week. So watch the space for that. However, what's been widely trailed is that you can bring employees back part-time, and they can be furloughed part-time as well. They are also expecting employers to make a contribution towards the cost. So your employee will still come out with 80% of their salary. However, the employer will be contributing to that, and figures have been banded around between 20 and 30%. So if you work on 25%, that's the sort of cost that you'll look like you're going to have to meet. So it does raise some further questions in as much as are you going to be able to bring back people full-time? Are you going to be able to have the work available for them full-time? Can you bring them back part-time? And these are all considerations you need to be thinking about now before the end of July. The next point we want to raise is on the self-employment income support scheme. That seems to be working quite well, and we've had a number of clients who've made the claim. They've been advised on how much they're getting, and the payments are now starting to go directly into the bank account. It seems to be fairly simple to do. Unfortunately, as agents, we're not allowed to make this claim for any self-employed person. The reason being is that HMRC are actually tracing the IP address from where the claim has come from. So if they see multiple claims from the same IP address, it triggers a fraud trigger on their system, and it can actually delay your claim whilst they look into it. So you need to make this claim yourself. We can guide you through the process and hold your hand through it, but we can't actually make the claim for you. Thirdly, on the bounce back, or fourthly, on the bounce back loans, again, these have been tremendously successful, and there's been a huge amount that's been lent out so far. Just as a reminder, it's up to 25% or £50,000, 25% of your turnover or £50,000. The government pays the interest for the first 12 months, and there is no capital repayment for the first 12 months. And you then have a following 5 years after that to make the repayment. So the general term is 6 years. You start making the repayments after year 1. So effectively, if you borrow £50,000, then you just need to be repaying £10,000 a year plus the interest, which has been capped at 2.5%. We've had a number of clients who've taken this up and have said, look, I'm just going to hold on to the money in case I need it, on the basis I'm not sure what's going to happen. You can then, if you don't need the cash, you can then repay it at the end of year 1. There are no redemption penalties, so it's worthwhile banking the money for the time being. And finally, on mortgage holidays, previously you've been entitled to claim for a 3-month mortgage holiday going forward, and there are proposals to extend this for a further 3 months, with a ban on repossessions going on for a further 3 months. This ties into the job retention scheme going up to the end of October. Bear in mind, though, you will still have to make the payment going forward, or the amount will be added onto your loan, but you need to approach your lender if you want to have that as well. So that's from August onwards as well. That's pretty much it on the government support update. Stuff is coming out pretty much all the time. There are other things which we don't think will affect the vast majority of people, but if anything does come out, we will let you know as soon as we can. What I'd like to do now is hand over to Emma Fay, who from the HR department, who's going to give us an update on how we can get back to work, what we need to be doing, and potentially redundancies that can be made during furlough process. So I'm going to make Emma the presenter, so if you just bear with me one sec. Okay, Emma, if you want to share your screen now, you are now the presenter.
Can you see that?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So, as Stephen said, I'm just going to cover a few key things that have been coming up with clients really over the last few weeks in terms of returning to work, and then I'll go on to talk about a little bit the what if you can't actually get staff back to work. So, as per this slide, there's no actual requirement to give people notice. It's a question I keep getting quite a bit, which is, we've got staff on furlough, how do I need to go about bringing them back? Well, the guidance doesn't set out any minimum notice periods, but we need to be realistic about it. Not only have staff probably got practical considerations of returning to work, but they will also likely have the actual mentally preparing themselves. If people have been furloughed for a number of weeks or months, it can be quite a big thing to then bring them back. So we would say at least 48 hours notice, more if you can. And we've got a few more tips in terms of how to go about that process a bit later on. Childcare is a major issue we're getting at the minute. Obviously, there's the idea of some schools reopening for some ages of children from the 1st of June, but we know a lot of parents are not sending their children back. So we are really having to be quite flexible in this respect, because we can't force staff to come to work if they've got no one to look after their children. We just can't do it. So obviously, if staff are on furlough at the minute, you might want to consider keeping them on furlough if they have childcare issues, or actually have a conversation about a flexible and bespoke arrangement that might work, whether that's working around the partner's working hours, working around school times. Understand what each of your staff has in terms of arrangements there. And you can cover this in a return to work interview, which I'll go on to talk about a little bit later. The health and safety implications are huge. Now, bit of a disclaimer, obviously I'm not a health and safety professional, so I can't give specific health and safety advice here. However, there is some really good detailed guidance from the government on creating a COVID secure workplace. And they've actually issued guidance for different workplace sectors as well. I think it is 8 or 9 different sectors. So well worth a look. And I would go through that in detail, and I'd also actually provide that guidance to your staff so that they can see what the actual government guidance is on your workplace. And that will help to reassure them that you've actually followed that guidance in terms of any measures you put in place. If you have a health and safety professional or an in-house health and safety employee, now's the time to be pulling on their expertise in terms of risk assessments. A risk assessment is going to be an absolute must in terms of going around your workplace and your working arrangements, understanding what the risks are, using that government guidance to actually assist you with that, and then documenting any measures that you put in place, whether that's extra hand sanitising units, screens in between desks, whatever it is, it's going to have to be in that risk assessment and reviewed regularly as well as the government guidance changes. There's also some posters on the government website that you can download and print off and stick around your workplace, which say that you have complied with the guidance, and that is another way to reassure staff that you are fully aware of what that guidance is. In terms of policies, your health and safety policy might be one of these actually that you need to review. You might have implemented home working, and that might be staying on an ongoing basis. You might need to review your IT policy. So things like, are staff now using their own IT equipment, or are they taking equipment home and they wouldn't have previously? You're going to just need to do a quick check on your employee handbook and your HR policies to make sure those are up to date and relevant, and they also contain any new information that's come out over the last few weeks. All of the points above really need to be communicated to staff, and I bang on about this all the time at the minute, is the importance of communication with your staff. So making sure they understand what you're doing, what changes are coming into force, how are you keeping them safe, and what are your measures in terms of staying up to date as well. So I would recommend a return to work interview, which is similar to what you would do if someone was off sick. You would have a chat with them. It could be done over the phone. I'm not talking about necessarily a face-to-face interview, but you're going to talk about their thoughts as well. Do they feel able to return to work? We know a lot of staff have developed or had mental health conditions made worse over the last few weeks and months, so we need to be really mindful of that. If staff do have anxieties about returning to work, we need to go really quite far as an employer in terms of reassuring them. So some companies are actually doing video walkthroughs of the new office layout, for example, to show the staff that actually, look, this is how we're making sure social distancing applies in the workplace. Also, you can just effectively tell them any measures, if you have changed any policies, the government guidance, the changing of working hours or shift patterns or anything that you've done, communicate it all in that return to work interview. Make sure it's really clear and make sure that staff fully understand it, and keep that communication going as the return to work process develops as well. Now, there is an issue where some staff just won't return, and that could be because of childcare, like I said before. It could be because they're too anxious, and that's why I think it's so important to really try and reassure the staff as much as you can. Otherwise, we are ending up in situations where staff are going to the doctors and getting signed off work with stress or anxiety because they really do feel too anxious to return and they feel pressured by their employers to return early. So be flexible, be understanding. If we get into a situation where you think staff are unreasonably refusing to return, you're going to need to take specialist advice on that, because normally in a situation where a staff member refuses to turn up for work, we're in disciplinary territory, sometimes even dismissals. This is very different because staff in this case can genuinely have a health and safety concern. So disciplinary action or dismissals are going to tend to be unfair. So you really need to be careful around that. However, if staff are being unreasonable, we still need to deal with that through the correct procedures. So on the other side, if you can't bring staff back, redundancies can still take place. It's important to remember that the normal rules on redundancies apply. So as in, it's a role, it's not a person. So this isn't the opportunity to get rid of someone who's annoyed you or maybe not been as cooperative as other people. That's not what redundancies is. It's purely about a requirement for a certain role or roles within the business. You also still need to consider all alternatives. And with this situation, it's whether the ongoing furlough scheme is an alternative to redundancy. You need to weigh that up. So when you're putting your business case together for potential redundancies, really make sure you're following the normal rules because they do still fully apply. So you can consult on redundancy during furlough if required. The guidance does make it clear that you can be made redundant whilst on furlough, which does then lead us to this conclusion that you can carry out the consultations as well. You might need to do those in a different way than you would normally. Obviously, we'd normally do face-to-face consultation meetings. However, we're going to be utilising virtual meetings and phone calls a lot more for this during this time. But as I said earlier, the normal process still applies. So full and meaningful consultation. So that means genuinely taking on board what the staff have to say, giving them the opportunity to suggest alternatives to redundancy as well, and actually feeding back as to why any alternatives are or are not viable. In terms of the job retention scheme, as Stephen just mentioned, we know it's in its current form until the end of July. We then know that there's some changes from the 1st of August. So we haven't got that guidance yet, due by the end of this week. So until we actually know what the situation is with the changes to the scheme, we need to almost hold off a little bit on any redundancies. However, if then it's the case that there's going to be an extra cost from the 1st of August, which obviously the employer's contributions furloughed wages will create, if actually the part furlough option isn't going to help you because you just still have too many staff for the workload, then you can start redundancy consultations. So timing is going to be key because you also need to factor in notice periods. I would suggest at this point, if redundancies are even a possibility, you make sure you know what notice period each staff member is on. A lot of the time, clients have assumed that everyone's on a month's notice, and it's very unlikely to be the case because notice periods do increase with length of service. So I would just set half an hour aside, just go through each person's contracts or start dates, check the notice periods and make sure you know what your liability is there. Because you may need to use the furlough scheme actually to fund some of that notice period if your finances are as such. So there's a consideration to think about. As I said, covered that already. Changes coming end of May. Part furlough is probably going to be one of the most useful things about the scheme. We are stuck at the minute with like an all or nothing approach to furlough. And lots of our clients at the minute already need to bring people back on a part-time basis, and it's still absolutely not an option, so don't do it now. Furlough is, you're either on furlough or you're not, but from the 1st of August we hope there's going to be this flexibility. We don't know what it looks like, but we hope that you can then bring people in maybe a couple of days a week to almost phase in that return to work process, because it's unlikely that companies who've been closed are going to then need their full staff team on their full hours straight away, but they may well do over the next few months. So as I said a minute ago, factor in that there's that potential additional cost, somewhere between 20 and 30% we think from the employer for furloughed staff's wages. So if that's actually going to be too much of an additional cost for you, then redundancies might be a possibility. And notice periods, I've already covered that one. So key points from this presentation: be flexible. Normal rules just can't always be applied at the minute. Like with the childcare situation, normally we say, look, it's the staff's problem, childcare isn't our issue, you come into work. It's just not practical to be like that during this, so be flexible with your staff, work around things, find arrangements that suit both parties, even if they're not perfect. Just try and think outside the box a little bit if you can. Be understanding. You don't know what the staff are going through unless you speak to them. Staff might have suffered bereavements, they might have family members who've had job losses, all sorts could be going on with them, and I think it's important to understand that and be empathetic towards it as well. It's probably going to be a tough time for managers all over the country in terms of dealing with their staff during such challenging times, because there's so many variations in terms of people's personal circumstances. Be supportive, make sure the staff can speak to you openly, so if they have concerns they can raise them with you. The last thing you want is them keeping those concerns to themselves and then taking them to an employment tribunal or the health and safety executive. So make sure you're very open to feedback from staff and you do respond positively. I know it's really hard for business owners who've worked so hard over the last few weeks to get their businesses back up to a point of opening, only to be met with some negativity from the staff. And it's happened a lot with some of my clients where they've phoned the staff and told them the good news about them being able to return from furlough, and actually the staff have been quite negative because they are anxious or because they think it's too soon. And I know that it's hard to not be disheartened by that, but just try and be understanding. Try and vent at someone else if you can about staff if you do feel they are being negative. If you've got an employee assistance programme, you can also use the opportunity to remind staff of that if they do need counselling support for any issues they might be going through. It's a good opportunity to remind them of that during a return to work interview. Be really clear, don't assume that staff know anything. Don't assume they're up to date with the government guidelines. A lot of people are avoiding the news, if anything, at the moment. So be really clear. Don't also think that, well, I've just told that staff member, so they'll speak to each other and they'll all know what's going on. Be consistent as well in how you communicate. And be fair. So just don't forget that employment law does continue. There's no furlough scheme or any of the government's recent implementations don't override employment law. So you need to stay within the rules. In particular, anti-discrimination laws are still very relevant. So thinking of employees who may have a disability, so a health condition, forcing someone with such a health condition to return to work is going to very likely land you in trouble, as is assuming that female employees have childcare issues so they don't need to come back to work yet. Don't assume anything, be really fair and be consistent. I think that's everything. Yeah, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much indeed, Emma. We do have a number of questions which have come through in the chat box. What I'd just first of all like to do is just bear with me 1 second while I make myself up as the presenter. Okay. Okay. So that's ourselves. What I'd like to do as well is just touching briefly on the working safely during the coronavirus. There is some government guidance on this, and if you can just see, I'm not sure if you can see that on, I'm just holding it up to the screen there if you're looking at me presenting, and they've got their 5 steps to working safely, which is basically what Emma was talking about. So you've got to carry out your COVID-19 risk assessment, you develop cleaning, hand washing and hygiene procedures, helping people to work from home as well, maintaining 2 metre social distancing where possible, and where people cannot be 2 metres apart, manage the transmission risk. And all the details of actually what you need to do are there. And as Emma said, there are a number of trades and categories which you can have a look at, which they've broken down into as well. So there's a lot of helpful guidance on the government website for that. Moving on to the questions, The first question we have is, when can we start to bring furlough staff back part-time? If you want to keep the staff on furlough, it won't be until the 1st of August when the new rules apply. If you want, you can bring staff back part-time at any point, but if you want to maintain their furlough payment and continue to receive the grant, it won't be until the 1st of August. And until we know all the full details of the rules, there's not much more guidance we can give you just at this stage. Next question we've had is, do we need to risk assess working from home? And assume the risk assessment is purely if you need staff to head to an office or business premises. Not according to this. I think you do need to risk assess people working from home. And what the guidance actually says is you take all reasonable steps to help people working from home by discussing home working arrangements, ensuring they have the right equipment, for example, remote access, including them in all necessary communications, looking after their physical and mental well-being. So that is actually broken down there on the government website. So I think you do need to risk assess people working from home as well. The next question is more of a business one. Is the government putting any pressure on businesses to continue paying people through furlough, even if the staff member is made redundant? The job market is slow, so putting people into the market through redundancy isn't good for people. We've not seen any evidence of that. They obviously, the whole point of the job retention scheme is to reduce the number of redundancies, but have you seen from the unemployment figures which came out a couple of weeks ago, people are already making huge redundancies, and it's went over 2.1 million, I believe, and on the last unemployment figures. So I don't think people are putting any pressure on businesses to do this. It's just more of a help to businesses to try and make sure they don't make too many people redundant. Next question is, as a director owner of the company, can you keep yourself furloughed for as long as possible? Emma, would you like to comment on that one?
Yeah, so I think the key thing, if you're director and owner, if you've got employees and you need to be doing some kind of facilitation of return to work or risk assessing or any of the things we've talked about, then you're not going to be on furlough because that's work. However, if you're the only one in your business or the management task can be carried out by someone else, I don't see why you can't stay on furlough. Just be mindful of the fact that from the 1st of August, you're going to be contributing to the furlough pay as well. So it's whether it's worthwhile if there's actually business tasks you could be carrying out that could be generating an income.
Yeah, agreed. And also some people might be able to generate small amounts of income, and it's a question then of doing the maths basically to see whether it's worthwhile staying on the furlough or whether it's worthwhile getting back into work and generating even small amounts of income, because it may well be more than the furlough payment that you're going to get after you've made your employer contribution. So it is something to think about. Next question, which is something which has come up quite a bit, and I'll go over to Emma for this one. Do employees still accrue holiday entitlement during the furloughed period?
Yes, they do. So as I said before, employment law continues completely. So because with furlough, there's no break in employment, the employment contract continues in full force other than pay and the fact that staff are not required to work. So yes, holidays still accrue at the normal contractual rate. So depending on what you would normally give them in terms of holiday entitlement, that's going to continue. You can ask staff to take holidays on certain dates, and that's what a lot of our clients are doing at the minute, because trying to plan for the rest of the year when staff haven't taken holidays maybe for 3 months is quite difficult if you've then got all your staff wanting holidays when you're busy and you need them in. We do recommend really planning that out. So there is now the option to allow staff to carry over up to 4 weeks of their annual leave entitlement for up to 2 years. So it's to give businesses a bit more flexibility if you're not able to grant holidays in this leave year. But you can also, like I say, ask employees to take holidays on certain dates. What you do need to do is give the right amount of legal notice, and that notice is double the amount of the holiday you want the person to take. So if you want to say certain staff members have to take 5 days holiday, you're going to have to give them at least 10 days notice of that, but you can do that, and you can actually have them on furlough whilst they're on holiday as well. You just need to top up their wages to 100%.
Great. So if they're on 80% at the moment, you just have to pay the 20% extra, and effectively they get full pay for the period that they're on holiday, but you can still claim the grant whilst they're on holiday pay, presumably.
Yes.
Great. I hope that answers your question. That's the total questions we've actually had through the chat box. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, feel free to do so. We've got a few minutes left if you want to start asking 1 or 2 questions.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Hi, I just got a question about the, the bringing staff back on, they're on furlough. If you bring them back for sort of non-income generating processes, can they stay on furlough? Like for sort of rearranging the store and things like that? Is that?
Emma?
I'm going to do that. I would say no, because it's going to be classed as work. So even if it's not income generating, it would be classed as providing a service to your business because you're using them for a business activity, even if it is just rearranging the store or whatever. So Sports Direct have recently been gripped for doing just that. They've had their managers on furlough, but have been asking their managers to go in and rearrange stores ready for reopening. And they've been reported by many employees to HMRC for that. So it's something to really be careful of. But when part furlough comes in, that's potentially a good use of part furlough, is to get them in doing a few activities and do it that way.
Sorry, is it likely that they may, for like sort of smaller businesses, bring that part-time in earlier? We're sort of in that position where we're going to have to bring people in, but there isn't work for their full-time hours for this month, but we are going to have to bring them back. So
yeah, and you're not alone there. And actually, as a business, the HR department, we've been lobbying for part furlough to come in, and we're now still lobbying for it to be brought in sooner, because exactly like yourself, we've got lots of clients who are just in that situation where there's not yet the work, bring someone back on their full hours, but as soon as you end furlough, you're liable for the full contractual hours. So it's really putting businesses in a tricky situation until August. So I'd say watch this space. We hope, we're really trying to push the government to reconsider this 1st of August introduction date, because we think it's too late for a lot of businesses. So yeah, unfortunately at the minute we're stuck on the 1st of August, but watch this space.
And I think I agree with you there as well, especially from following the announcement yesterday when most small businesses can open from the 15th of June. It doesn't kind of tie into the 1st of August start date for the change in the furlough scheme. So we're hoping then, yeah, there will be some changes to that. Anybody else want to ask a question? Feel free just to unmute yourself, or if you don't want to, just stick something in the chat box. Okay. Nobody else has got any questions. That brings an end to this webinar. I hope you found it very useful. And many thanks again to Emma Fay of the HR department, who, as I say, previously has been with us throughout this process and helping us and our clients dealing with all the intricacies of what the furlough scheme means to everybody. If you've enjoyed the webinar, please make sure you can pass it on to anybody else. The recording of this will be up on our YouTube channel. That's Harts Limited, with limited spelt in full, along with all the other webinars that we've done over the last few weeks. Again, if you want to suggest any further webinars that you'd like to have some help and advice on, please feel free to drop us an email and we'll sort something out. So thank you very much indeed for attending, and I wish you a good week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.